All right, you've been listening to day 3 of the confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Today's the final day for Judge Jackson to defend her record and her judicial philosophy. She's been pressed on a range of issues from her judicial philosophy, the separation of powers, and whether a president is above the law. She's also been asked about abortion and expanding the Supreme Court, as well as criminal sentencing. And we have seen some heated moments, including during questioning that Jackson got by Senator Lindsey Graham. Let's listen to that.
So in a world in which the mail is used for the purpose of distribution, it really matters whether the person has distributed 1 or 5 or 1,000. And so the guideline says, you know what? We are going to treat a person who's distributed 1,000 a lot worse, because that shows that this person is really engaged in this really horrible behavior. In comes the internet. On the internet, with one click, you can receive, you can distribute tens of thousands. You can be doing this for 15 minutes, and all of a sudden, you are looking at 30, 40, 50 years in prison.
Good. Good.
I understand.
Absolutely
Senator,
good. I hope you are.
To do.
Good.
Allow her to finish, please.
I hope you go to jail for 50 years if you're on the internet trolling for images of children in sexual exploitation. So you don't think that's a bad thing? I think that's a horrible thing.
That's not what the witness said, and she should be allowed to answer this question once and for all. Senator,
all I'm trying to explain is that our sentencing system, the system that Congress has created, the system that the Sentencing Commission is the steward of, is a rational one. It's a system that is designed to help judges do justice in these terrible circumstances by eliminating unwarranted disparities, by ensuring that the most serious defendants get the longest periods of time. And when modes of commission of the crime change, such that in 2 seconds, someone can receive or distribute thousands of images. That's no longer and this is what the commission found in their studies, an indicator of a person who, relative to other people, has committed this crime in a more aggravated way.
That was just part of a much larger interaction between Senator Lindsey Graham and Judge Jackson. A lot of interruptions there as Judge Jackson tried to explain some sentencing rulings that she had made in child pornography cases. I want to bring in senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer, who's there in the hearing room, ABC political reporter Brittany Shepard, and ABC News contributor, legal analyst Kate Shaw, who's here with me on set. And Devin, I'd like to start with you, because as you predicted, they got a little tense at times, particularly during that line of questioning by Graham. What's it like there in the room?
Well, first, Diane, you've got to observe night and day performance by Judge Jackson. And in the clip you just played, what an extraordinary display of pushback. She is animated. She is engaged. She is emotive. She is really, engaging with these senators today in a way that yesterday, much more reserved, cool, calm, collected. It's night and day. One of her former clerks texted me and said, this is the real Ketanji that you're starting to see today. So clearly more confidence from the judge today as she pushed back. I'll also say that exchange, again, trying to lay out the context and nuance of sentencing. The country is getting quite the education the past few days in what goes into judicial sentencing. And, while Senator Graham certainly is allowed and is raising legitimate questions and concerns about her record, there are also some inconsistencies. He's being a bit disingenuous, cutting her off, not allowing her to explain the factors that Congress has in fact required judges to take a look at, and not addressing the inconsistencies himself. I mean, I was just taking a look, Diane, Lindsey Graham has supported 6 federal judges just in the past few years, appointed to the federal bench, promoted to the federal appeals court, who also delivered sentences in child porn cases below the federal guidelines and below what the government requested. His office just got back to me and said that for Judge Jackson, this is sort of a new job and a new standard, and therefore he believes that she should be held to that higher standard. Certainly a reasonable approach, but no explanation as to why it would be endangering children, and, as he was implying here in what she did, but not endangering children with these numerous other judges that he and other Republicans on the committee have supported. So we're seeing a continuation of that prosecution, but as a lot of members on his side of the aisle have said already, it really rings hollow.
And, you know, the stakes obviously are higher here than on previous confirmation processes and hearings. But with these hearings, there always does come a bit of political theater. And we know a lot of these senators are going to be understandably trying to score some political points. But, Brittany, when you see this kind of exchange of a lot of interruptions, and especially given that Brown did keep her composure, she didn't really lose her cool, could this kind of a strategy backfire for Graham or anybody else who tries to be a bit more forceful and tries to do a lot of interrupting like we just saw?
Well, there are certainly Democrats who are taking to Twitter who believe that Lindsey Graham is trying to poke the bear and get under Ketanji Brown Jackson's skin. Like Devin said, this is not the Ketanji Brown Jackson we saw on Monday and Tuesday. This is one who's willing to fight back, push back on inaccuracies, but you see she's getting flustered. She's sighing, she's making faces. Clearly, this provocation is getting under her skin, and Republicans run the risk of getting stereotyped as someone who's trying to further a narrative of the angry black woman. We heard this when Republicans were trying to write now Vice President Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams as unwieldy, as someone unable to answer questions during debates or unable to pin down reporter questions. And Democrats are already angry. They're already sharpening their knives. They're already taking to Twitter saying that Lindsey Graham is being inappropriate in his questioning, and whether intentional or not, he is painting this narrative and might be building to a narrative to try to get under Ketanji Brown Jackson's skin. So there is a made-for-TV moment, something like in the Kavanaugh hearing where they're screaming or crying, or at least for Ketanji Brown Jackson making a face to say, I can't handle this anymore. That's something the Republicans are looking for their made-to-TV moment. And it, like I said earlier, runs the risk of being painted as like playing towards racist tropes, which the Republicans do not want to get their hands stuck in that cookie jar.
And Kate, in terms of the legal arguments here, Graham is trying to show that Jackson is soft on crime, or trying to argue that at least, especially in relation to these child pornography sentences. And then we have Jackson, who seems to be arguing that she was applying these sentences in a way, or the guidelines at least, in the way that they were intended. So walk us through these legal arguments and why this continues to come up.
Sure. And I will say, I do think that she was more animated in that exchange with Graham and several others today, but I'm not sure we're seeing her flustered so much as really determined to communicate what she understood her task to be and her role as a judge to be. Look, she's a criminal justice expert and a sentencing expert in particular, right? Well before she was a federal judge, she was a staffer on the Sentencing Commission. She was a federal defender representing people facing charges and sentencings. Then she was a commissioner on the Sentencing Commission, and now, nearly a decade as a federal judge. So she knows sentencing inside and out. And I don't think she's going to just sit quietly while she's challenged in terms of her kind of bona fides on federal sentencing. She knows this world is a policy matter, and she has done it time and time again. So what she's explaining with respect to the child pornography cases, including the one that Graham was asking about, is that they're simply something quite outdated in the way the sentencing guidelines treat volume or quantity of child pornography materials, because they were drafted in a pre-internet age in which it was wildly more serious to have, 100 or 1,000 pieces of material versus just a few. And so the severity of the sentence was dramatically different as between, offender 1 and offender 2 based on quantity. And her point is that in an internet age in which in 1 second you can download enormous quantities of material, there's nothing to suggest that's not serious, but that doesn't distinguish the seriousness of that offender from another offender who may have less material but more serious other aggravating factors. And so her explanation is we can't just look at quantity. And I think she was very firm in that position. And the explanation, and again, situating that in the context of a regime in which Congress has said federal district judges must exercise discretion, take a lot of factors into account, and render the sentence that will do justice and not promote unwarranted disparities. And I think she very much has been defending the fact that that's what she did in each and every case.
Devin, we've also heard Graham focus on a case surrounding the role of the federal government in immigration cases. What's the background on that case? We keep hearing Lindsey Graham and others mentioning sole discretion, the fact that that was written in as part of the law. Why are we hearing so much about this case? What's the background there?
It was a high-profile case. It was called Make the Road versus DHS, the DHS secretary at the time, and it's a Trump administration case, Diane, that was reversed. Her opinion in the case was reversed by the D.C. Circuit. So we heard Lindsey Graham calling out the fact that she was overruled, and it did deal with the expedited removal of undocumented immigrants in this country. And you saw him bring out the poster board, bring out the text of the law, which he said Congress made very clear. There you see it, that the government has the decision and discretion to expedite the removal that shall not be questioned. But what she reasoned, she stood up for her decision here, was that the way the Trump administration did this under the Administrative Procedures Act, which sets out the guidelines for how the government can change its policies, was not appropriate. And so she reasoned that the appeals court reversed her, said, no, actually the law is very, very clear. And so there was a bit of a tangle there. She stood for her view, but there was really no hiding the fact that she was overturned, but she owned it.
And Brittany, Lindsey Graham, for all his fireworks, he's not only supported Judge Jackson's confirmation in the past, he also voted to confirm Justices Sotomayor and Kagan, both Obama nominees. So does it seem like Judge Jackson can get not Graham support specifically, but Republican support in general? And if so, who do you think seems most likely to vote in her favor?
Well, the environment inside the chamber and outside the chamber, like you said, is a little bit different. I think it's a foregone conclusion to think Lindsey Graham is going to be following up on his support with Ketanji Brown Jackson. But if you asked me maybe 2 hours ago, it seemed that John Cornyn was open to maybe supporting Ketanji Brown Jackson. You know, this is actually an office, a place to work, so folks are leaving to make votes, surprise, surprise. And reporters are able to catch John Cornyn in the hallways, and he still said that he is not written out supporting KBJ at the end of this week, but is skeptical on some child porn sentencing, and especially this issue of court packing. We're hearing court packing, court packing, court packing. It's the sound clip of the day. And Republicans have been pushing Ketanji Brown Jackson to firm up her opinion, and it doesn't seem like something that Ketanji Brown Jackson is willing to give her opinion on record, and she has been mounting a pretty good defense of why. Outside the chamber, there seems to be some movement. Susan Collins was able to catch up with our Rachel Scott earlier this morning and said that she's keeping an open mind, which is one of 3 possible grab bag Republicans for the White House and for Democrats to get in their big bipartisan headline. Still not much movement from Mitt Romney and Murkowski. I'm curious to see how they'll characterize their view of the hearings later on this evening.
And Kate, Judge Jackson is also pressed on abortion quite a bit. Roe v. Wade could be in the crosshairs of the Supreme Court soon. Do you feel like you've gleaned anything from her answers and from previous decisions?
So she's been very careful in her answers, hasn't really touched anything too closely related to abortion or Roe versus Wade. Look, the court is right now considering a case out of Mississippi that, will, I think, very likely involve the court either functionally or formally overruling Roe. So, it's not abstract. It's coming, I think, down the pike very soon. So there'll be also questions about, in a post-Roe era, what kinds of restrictions states can impose, maybe on things like travel out of state to obtain abortion. So this is all something that will very much be before her if she is confirmed and on the court by next fall. She was asked, Mike Lee asked her to distinguish between 2 previous Supreme Court cases on partial birth abortion, one a state case the court struck down, and then, or a state law the court struck down, and then a federal law the court upheld. Lee asked her what was the difference between those 2 laws, and she sort of identified some potential differences in lower court findings. But actually the truth of the matter is what changed between those 2 cases was the composition of the Supreme Court, right? Different justices have voted in different ways about what the Constitution protects in terms of a right to autonomy and a right to control reproductive decision-making. Right now we do have a quite conservative court that seems really skeptical of Roe versus Wade. So I think that, there's every reason to believe that she supports, the holding of Roe versus Wade, and that she has said many times today and yesterday that she believes in stare decisis, that the court should adhere to its prior decisions. And yet I think she was for good reason, extraordinarily careful about saying anything too definitive about abortion and the Constitution, you know, and given sort of norms about talking about things that are so clearly currently before the court and likely to come again before the court, I think she was right to steer clear.
And now, Brittany, there's always a level of political theater during these hearings. Do you feel like you've gleaned any political insights from some of the questions asked so far, particularly from potential presidential hopefuls in 2024?
I think we saw a lot of that political theater play out yesterday with Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, and Josh Hawley. And what I've gleaned so far is that the road to a potential presidential nominee, if you're a Republican, is in the trenches of what we like to call the culture war and what Republicans have been mounting for the past few months. I was at CPAC in Orlando. It feels like a long time ago. It was just a few weeks ago. Senator Cruz was there making similar arguments against this boogeyman of critical race theory, not talking about it in its practical applications in the legal field or its study of it in law school or in upper education, but how it might impact Republican voters' children. And then you saw a similar question posed to Ketanji Brown Jackson by Ted Cruz just yesterday. And I quote, "Do you believe babies are racist?" End quote. It's the soundbite I think is to be heard around the world this week. And of course, that kind of question doesn't fall within Judge Brown Jackson's purview and probably will not if she sits on the Supreme Court. But it plays well with voters. It plays well in state houses where voters are worried and parents are worried about this boogeyman that they don't really know about, that they're not really encountering, and that teachers are having to fight day in and day out as they're being removed from school boards in places like Texas, in places like Florida. And that's also why I think you saw someone like Tom Cotton be so firm about crime and capital punishment. He knows that Ketanji Brown Jackson can't answer those kinds of leading questions of whether there should be more or less people in prison. In fact, I believe if she answered any of those kinds of questions, he would be outraged and he would be tweeting about it and his office would be flaming her up and down, as with the R-S-C. But it's a good posture to take to show that you, as a Republican, was tough on Biden's so-called progressive nominee. And I suspect we're going to see more of that today. Ted Cruz, I believe, is either next up or one of the next few senators to speak as folks come back from lunch. And I'm curious if he does things like he did in the intro, like plug his podcast. And if you're a voter turning in today, you're going to get confused with all this legalese. And so I think you're going to see more of that coming on today.
They have the spotlight and they know it. Devin, on that note, there was also another testy exchange with Senator John Cornyn, who appeared to try to pin Judge Jackson down on whether or not she called former President George W. Bush a war criminal in an argument for one of her past cases. Let's listen to that moment.
Let me just ask you one question. When you accuse somebody of a crime, are you calling them a criminal?
Oh, Senator, I haven't accused anybody of a crime.
That's not my question. When in common understanding and in plain English, if you accuse someone of a crime, are you accusing them of being a criminal?
It depends on the context. It depends on what else you say about them. It depends on the circumstances.
It depends on the circumstances.
Yes.
So you put this in the same category as defining what a biological woman is?
No, You're
really not sure.
I didn't say I wasn't sure. I said it depends on the circumstances.
So you are sure?
No, I said it depends on the circumstances that you're positing as to whether or not you're calling someone a criminal.
Devin, this exchange went in a lot of different directions. So can you put this into context for us? What are both Jackson and Cornyn trying to argue here?
This is a follow-up point from an exchange the two of them had yesterday, although Senator Cornyn today not directly mentioning it here. He's trying to be a little cute by coming at Judge Jackson sort of out of left field on this one. But this is a dispute both of them argued about yesterday. Remember, Judge Jackson was a federal public defender for a time. She represented some Guantanamo Bay detainees, also in private practice. And in one of those briefs she filed on behalf of the detainees, she made arguments on behalf of her client at the U.S. Supreme Court, alleging that one of the reasons why her her client should be given a hearing was that he was being mistreated in U.S. custody, and she wrote in the brief that those sorts of behaviors would amount to a war crime, would amount to torture. And so yesterday we saw John Cornyn accuse her with that writing of calling George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld war criminals. She said she didn't use those direct words, and today he was trying to connect those dots and say, well, if you were writing in your brief that there was a crime committed, isn't that effectively calling someone a crime? She didn't bite. She did a pretty good job dancing around that, Diane, but that's what that was all about.
All right, Devin Dwyer, Brittany Shepard, Kate Shaw, thank you all.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.